it was actually on the back of a relative of yours died because of their rejection of Islam.
I saw my mother sitting in the living room and crying. 12 times he shot at her face. Quran is supposed to be the exact dictated spoken word of Allah. There was just too much ignorance. I don't believe in it.
How did your family react?
People who leave Islam are to be put to death.
And what ultimately made you start to think about taking Christianity seriously?
I was impressed with Christianity. After I went that one time to church, I wanted to go again and again and again. Come to Christianity, it turns into hope, into kindness, into forgiveness, into beauty. You don't have these things in Islam.
Here in the UK at the time of recording is the renewed inquiry into the rape gangs scandal. Is this in any way prescribed by the Quran or Islam? What's your view on this? Hello and welcome along to today's show. I'm Justin Brierley, really looking forward to this conversation with Ridvan Aydemir, also known as the Apostate Prophet, about his journey from Islam to a long period as a secular agnostic atheist to eventually embracing Christianity only quite recently. We'll talk about Islam in the West and all kinds of other issues along the way. But if you like today's video, then do make sure to like it here on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. And if you go to the info, you can find ways to support us and get my newsletter. I'll even send you free chapters of both my books when you subscribe to the newsletter. And why not drop me a comment about what you think of my conversation with Ridvan today? Ridvan, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity. I've known your stuff for a while, so it's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure is all mine. I want to begin with the young Ridvan Aydemir. You grew up in a Muslim family in Germany, interestingly. What was life like, and what kind of difference did being a Muslim in that environment make?
It was very special in many different ways, not only good ways, not only bad ways, but so yeah, you got that right. So I grew up as a as a Turkish Muslim in Germany to a family of immigrants who were there as successors of a generation of Turkish people who were invited to basically temporarily stay and work in Germany. Things got a little bit out of hand, and most of the people that came there stayed there, and then Germany had to deal with basically trying to integrate them and all that, despite all their cultural differences. So my family was one of those families. I grew up in Germany with a very religious Muslim family. And from a very early age, I really liked German culture. I liked the German way. I liked Christian culture. In fact, when I was in kindergarten and in my first grades in Germany, I learned a beautiful song, a lullaby, a beautiful Christian song about Saint Martin. Saint Martin of Tours, and it has stuck with me for the longest time. A story where he rides one night in the cold winter, and then a beggar asks him for help, and Saint Martin cuts his cloak in half and gives half of it to him. And later, in a vision, Christ appears to him and has the cloak on him and thanks him for it. And then he turns toward Christianity and all that. So Christian things like that stuck with me, and I really loved them. On the other hand, at home, I was in a very religious Muslim family, and the religious Muslim family is what people would generally refer to as radical. That is generally what a religious Muslim family is. It is radical. So at home, I learned that that Christians and non-Muslims are immoral and not trustworthy, and that they are somehow the enemy. And but on the other side, when I went to school, I learned all these beautiful things. I remember as a child in first grade, at some point I was told over the weekend of how in the possible future there will be a time when we when we Muslims will fight the disbelievers, and we will especially fight and kill the Jews, and the Jews will be hiding behind rocks and trees, but we will eventually get them all. And the Christians will also be our enemies and all that. So this is the kind of stuff that I learned, and I was afraid and fascinated by it. But at the same time, I have very good relations with Christians and with non-Muslims. So it was a very, very wild thing to go through.
It sounds like it was a real disconnect between what you were being taught or perhaps indoctrinated with at home versus the actual Christianized Western culture that you came to appreciate.
Exactly. So the contrast was very big, and it was kind of disturbing. And the thing is, most people who grew up the way I grew up, who grew up in this religious Muslim culture, inside a non-Muslim culture, usually end up going with it because they are also given very imposing, very strong, very authoritarian Muslim standards. Islamic culture, what people don't understand, is very, very strong. It is one that is built on absolute loyalty to not just a faith, but to almost a nationality. So in Islam, the Muslims are viewed as one nation. So if you turn if you turn your back on Islam, it's not like in the West, not like in Christianity, where you cease having faith, and it's kind of something mildly sad. It is much worse than that. It means turning your back on your nation, on your family, on your parents, on your siblings, and you become a traitor, basically. So, which is why most people go with it, because it's much easier to do. For me, it just went differently.
It did, and hence why you came to term yourself the Apostate Prophet. But we'll get to that in a moment. I know that your story takes a turn when you eventually moved, somewhat against your will, from Germany to Turkey. Tell me about that transition and what happened once you arrived there.
Yeah, I was around 15 to 16 years old, so almost 16, is when my parents wanted to, or decided to move to Turkey from Germany. They always had this whole idea that as Muslims they shouldn't be living in a non-Muslim country. And to this day I'm kind of conflicted about what I think of that, because on the one hand I hated it, and it caused so much pain, and it was so unnecessary and tribalistic and wrong. On the other hand, contrary to most people, they were actually consistent with their beliefs. So, I guess I have to respect that aspect about them. So they actually went through with, we can't be living here. There's no benefit to it. We have to move to a Muslim country. And in Islam, there is this whole idea that a country that is ruled by Muslims, or a place that is ruled by Muslims, is called a house of Islam, whereas a place that is ruled by un-Islamic, non-Islamic laws is called a house of war, a Darul Harb. So in that place, people are not meant to just live and exist. They are meant to be there for specific reasons, such as spreading the religion by will or by force, imposing certain things, or just being there out of necessity temporarily. So with that whole idea, my parents were there, but eventually decided to move to Turkey, and I had to move as well. But with the bond that I had built with Germany and the German way of thinking and Christianity, it was very difficult for me to live in Turkey and to integrate there. There was a huge culture clash happening in my head, and I never really accepted it. But I turned toward an identity crisis, turned toward far left socialist activism, communism, started believing in things like fighting violently against injustices and overthrowing the governments and all that, while also holding on to some kind of respect for my Islamic belief, which my parents, were very firm about. Until I would say, yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I was going to say you were on a sort of search, obviously, in those 19 years. Now, interestingly, the way you actually resolved this was to actually turn towards Islam, to embrace Islam. Interestingly, I seem to remember from watching a video where you were talking about this that it was actually on the back of a relative of yours. She actually died because of their rejection of Islam, or perhaps you could explain it a little better than that.
Yeah, I had a so. I'm sorry. Every single time that I talk about this, although I'm kind of I should be expecting this, I'm kind of thinking about it as kind of it's difficult still, but so it was my aunt who was in her 30s, who was in her early 30s. In her late 20s, her and I became very close. She was like an older sister to me, and she was in Germany, and she was a very, very free spirit. She would like go her own way, do her own thing. She was very well educated, very well spoken. She was a great example. She was a little bit wild. She would just go against the traditions of our of the relatives and her own parents and do whatever she wants, live her life. She was very successful as a career woman and all that. But at some point, because of the constant clashes that she had with her parents and relatives and siblings, including my father, for example, she tried to go more toward tradition. So she decided to, she went down the path of finding a Muslim man, a religious Muslim man, and trying to build a proper traditional life. So she did find a guy from Turkey. That guy went over there after a while. They started living together after they got married. And it turned out quickly that it clearly wasn't really for her. The man became authoritarian, abusive, said things like, you can't talk to this person and that person, you can't go online and just play I don't know, pool with a bunch of anonymous online people, you can't chat with online people, you can't have conversations with your colleagues and so on, you have to spend time here at home, you can't go outside whenever you want, no, you can't go to meetings, no, you can't go to this and this and that, you're a woman, you have to act like one, and so on. So she was trying to get through that and was trying to kind of resist and trying to reason with him, and he became increasingly threatening and violent. And one day she messaged me, and at that time I'm living in Turkey, and she's like one of the very few friends, or despite being a much older aunt, that I had at the time. And she messaged me about how he threatened her and all that, and she asked the police for to step in and to issue a thing that he has to stay away from her. But then after a while, so one day when I was in school, that was in high school, when I was in school, this was a very strange thing to me at that time. I had, my eye was twitching the whole day, and I had a severe headache, and my eye never twitched before. This was the first time, brutally, severely, and I had no idea what was going on. So I asked for permission to go home from school early, and went home, laid down on my bed, took a nap, woke up late in the evening, and then saw my mother sitting in the living room and crying. And I asked, what's happening? What's going on? And she said, your aunt. I was like, what is with my aunt? I said, she's dead. And it was very insane to comprehend. Then I saw that there was a report online, a news report about how she had been shot and killed by that man. 12 times he shot at her face before shooting himself, and later on succumbing to his own wounds and dying as well. But her death, prior to her death, she told me lots of things about, she criticized sometimes the way I think about things, my wild communist endeavors. And she told me about tradition and about how maybe there is something more, maybe we can find something in the faith that our parents and all that follow. With her death, paradoxically and weirdly, instead of turning away, I actually turned toward Islam to kind of follow what she was telling me before she died. And so I was a Muslim before that, but when that happened, I actually became serious about my faith and started practicing it. So before that, I just confessed that I'm a Muslim, and that was all. So then I started becoming very religious and changing the way I act, changing the way I speak, the way I dress, growing a big beard and no mustache, and praying 5 times a day, staying up through nights and praying and reading the Quran and reading different texts by Muslim scholars and all that. And I did that for quite a few years until I just started going against a wall at some point, because I read the Quran once and it was kind of confusing. Then I read it again twice and it was even more confusing. And I had so many questions, and these questions, and the more I asked them, the more I tried to suppress them. I thought, I'm not supposed to ask these questions. I'm not supposed to. I did ask scholars. I did ask others who know better, specifically about how the Quran is supposed to be the exact dictated spoken word of Allah, of the Almighty, all-knowing God. So this is very different from the Bible, for example. This is in Islam, the Quran is meant to be directly verbatim the spoken word of Allah. So all of it is directly spoken by Him. It is not just inspired and formulated or written by humans. It is directly inspired by Him through the angel into the ears of the Prophet Muhammad, who then dictates it to his people and who then write it down as a book. And in that book, there was just too much ignorance, including about the natural world around us, about the sky, the sun, how things work, about the Bible, about things like these. And I asked questions and I never got satisfying answers. And I talked about this lengthily on why I left Islam. I mentioned many of the things that caused these doubts. And at some point I decided, okay, I'm supposed to just not think about these things any further. It is clearly something evil. I am clearly not smart enough, not intelligent enough to question Allah's words. If I go down this path, this is bad. So I try to abstain from it. But then, as I tried to suppress that, it became much worse over time. And eventually, I allowed myself, when I was in the military. This was a funny thing. When I was done with high school, I was like, I was one of the best at my high school, and I had the opportunity to go to one of the best universities in Turkey, and I was accepted, but I didn't go because I was so obsessed with my Islamic faith. And I instead went to the military to serve. But during the military service, I focused more and more on my doubts, and at one point I allowed myself, and I told myself, it is Allah who created me and who created my mind, who created my brain, who gave me the ability to think and to question. How could it possibly be wrong to allow these questions? So once I opened that door, there was just no coming back, because the questions were too damning, I would say.
I mean, briefly, what were some of the key problems you ran into with the Quran? I mean, it's interesting because you mentioned some of the scientific issues. You felt that there was information that was just clearly not correct, if this was supposed to be the direct revelation of the Word of God. But by the same token, I hear many atheists make the same kind of criticism of the Bible, especially the early chapters of Genexis or whatever. Well, that's not scientific, and so on. So I guess that could cut both ways. But yeah, what do you think?
Well, so the difference between how the Bible does it and how the Quran does it is also very much that, for example, in the Christian tradition, very early on, we are taught that the Bible is not meant to be a book that is supposed to be read as a scientific report on things, and that much of, like, the early church fathers, from what I have learned so far, and from what I see from the early church fathers, have told us that much of the first 5 books of Moses, the Torah, Genesis, are very allegorical and all that, and serve a certain purpose. And on the other hand, with Islam, with the Quran, Muslims also later on came up with the whole rhetoric, with the whole response that it is not a scientific book, but Muslims early on, for most of the time, actually throughout most Islamic history, did believe that the Quran is very literal in what it describes. And the Quran also repeatedly repeatedly appeals to the natural world and Allah's creation and says, and do you see how the birds fly and how Allah holds them up? Or look at the sky. Do you see any fault, any crack in it? See how Allah creates things. So the Quran repeatedly from Allah's mouth appeals to the natural world and uses the description that it makes of the natural world as proof that it is indeed written by the Almighty, all-knowing creator of the world. So in that way, it very much is attempting to be scientifically accurate, but it fails brutally. And it also says it also says in the second chapter of the Quran that if it was from any other than Allah, you would find in it contradictions or mistakes. And then we look at the Quran. I prepared a video which I want to turn into a book at some point of over 50, but between 50 and 60 scientific mistakes in the Quran, including how the shape of the world is described. How one of the many damning things to me was, it might sound like a joke nowadays, especially to people who just hear it or who have heard the apologetics of it, but the Quran actually describes that. In a story that it tells, it tells a story of a man named Dhul Qarnayn, which stands for the two-horned one. And it says, so they ask you about the two-horned one. Let me tell you about him. And it says that he was a servant of Allah. He was guided by Allah, and he went to the furthest east and went to the place where the sun rises. And he saw it rising upon a people, and they had no shelter against it. So he built them shelters to protect them from the sun, and he also went exactly in the reverse order. He also went to the furthest west, to the setting place of the sun, and there he found the sun setting in a muddy spring. So that's what he saw right there. Now, reading this, I was very confused about this whole story, and I thought, wait a minute, this has a very clear description of how the sun actually has a place where it rises, and a place where it rises and is clearly very close to those people who have no protection against it, and then a place where it goes down and then sets in a muddy spring. Now, many Muslims later on in history, especially today, started interpreting this as just appearing like that, but it clearly is not like that. The earliest Muslim interpretations didn't talk about what this actually means. They talked about what the features of that place are, where the sun sets, whether it's a hot spring, whether it's murky, whether it's dark, and so on. And the story itself, Dhul Qarnayn, the two-horned one, is actually clearly has parallels with legends about Alexander the Great. So what happened is that people came and asked about Alexander the Great, and Muhammad probably had no idea, so he heard a few things, and then he started presenting Alexander the Great, the two-horned one, as he was known, as a servant of Allah who was guided by Allah, and so on. So and then further, it goes into the traditions attributed to Muhammad, which Islam affirms as completely authoritative and authentic, in which Muhammad further explains, for example, that the sun, at the time of the setting, it goes and travels toward its resting place, where it stops and prostrates to Allah, and then it asks for permission to rise again in the morning, and Allah tells it, okay, go ahead and rise. But one day, it will say to the sun, Allah will say to the sun, you are not allowed to rise, go back where you came from. So then it will suddenly rise from the setting place in the west, and the sun will come from the west, and this is when we will know that the day of judgment is very close. And that sounded very familiar, because from very early age I learned from my parents that one of the great signs of the day of judgment is that the sun will rise from the west. So going into all these things, it was very clear that there is a huge, massive ignorance of the world around us in the 7th century. Yeah.
And it wasn't only those scientific sort of physical aspects that you felt the Quran seemed to not get right, but I think you started to question the moral character of the Quran and Muhammad, and you were obviously doing all of this in the wake of the 9/11 terrorist attacks and the ongoing terrorist attacks that have taken place in many parts of the world from Islamic extremists. But did you kind of, when you looked at the Quran at that, started to look into it, did you find that that was in any way justified, this kind of jihad, war, and so on?
Largely, yes. Here is the thing. So what drove me mostly to reject Islam as truth was the realization that it is ignorant and it is not true. The moral aspect of Islam was a big problem to me. And I realized as I read the Quran and as I read Islamic scripture and Islamic tradition more and more, I realized that there was a great clash between what I learned and what I loved in the world. It changed me, and as much as I didn't like it, I kind of tried to accept it and try to change my mind, because I thought, well, I don't know, Allah knows best, So I learned from very early age. I always had very good interactions with girls. I always thought I always had good amounts of female friends and male friends, and I really loved the whole the equality that I found in Germany, which is very, very interesting. And then that is completely subdued and radically changed in Islam, for example, where in chapter 4, verse 24, Islam basically allows men to take female captives of war and have sex with them whenever they want, or whenever the Muslim man wants. This is further elaborated in the traditions and in the Islamic history. In chapter 4, verse 34, it then says that men are superior to women, that men may marry them, and the women must obey the men, and that if the men only fear arrogance of the women, they may advise them, punish them by separating the beds, and then finally beat them. And then we have the traditions attributed to Muhammad in which it is described that when Muhammad began implementing his Islam, the women were suffering brutally. Like, according to his wife, his child bride, by the way, the women of the Muslims were treated very brutally. And they had, like, one day a woman came in and her skin was so green, according to her description from all the beatings, that the green of her skin was just like her green dress. And then you would expect in this story, for example, normally with a Western mindset, an intervention and something moral about how Muhammad then comes in and tries to fix that. But that's not what happens in the story. In the story, Muhammad actually blames the woman for being disobedient and for complaining about her husband. And then he goes out and says, many women have come to complain about the beatings by their husbands. They are not the best among people. He refers to the women who are complaining. So there is the woman stuff, and then there is the extremist jihadist stuff, of course. There is the Quran's clear commandments to not befriend the Jews and the Christians, as it says, because the Jews and Christians are friends of one another, and whoever befriends them is one of them. It further says that Muslims have a duty to make Islam superior over everything else. Muhammad says in the traditions that he has been sent by Allah to fight against the people until they all testify that there is no God but Allah and that he is the messenger of Allah. He tells people that when they encounter non-Muslim populations, they are supposed to go and fight them and give them three options, which are to convert to Islam, to become subjects, or to be fought and be enslaved by the Muslims. Or forcibly converted, whatever you want to do after you're fought and killed, or barely, or almost killed. Lots of these things are directly from Islam, which is why. And then, of course, there's the other thing, which is about apostasy, which concerns me a lot, which kind of contributed to me choosing the name Apostate Prophet, because according to Islam, traditionally. So Sunni Islam has four branches of moral jurisprudence. Shia Islam has several, but they all agree on one thing, which is that people who leave Islam, people who apostatize from Islam, are to be put to death. And then there are details, depending on which scholar you look at, about how much time the person should be given, whether women and men should both be executed, whether there is a chance to forgive them if they repent. But they all agree fundamentally that with all the trivial data, with all the trivial details aside, people who leave Islam should be killed, because that's what Muhammad said. He said, whoever changes his religion, kill him. So I had it in my mind early on, leaving Islam means deserving death. But this only pushed me to just rebel against that, actually, later on. And this is also what the early Muslims did. What the early Muslims did was, after Muhammad's death, there was lots of internal, there were people who internally defected and went their own way. And the first successor of Muhammad then started a series of wars that are now known as the Ridda Wars, which stands for the Apostasy Wars, where he waged wars on all the remaining Muslims and forcibly put them under the fold of the Islamic Empire again, from where it started for centuries, to conquer, to brutally ravage, to pillage, to convert, to enslave the masses. And this is how Islam spread. It vastly spread through military expansions. And I would recommend a book by Dr. Robert G. Hoyland called In the Name of God, or no, In God's Path. That's what it's called, where he explains how Islam spread early on and also later on, where it violently spreads. It spreads by subjugating different populations, brutally oppressing them, enslaving them, and then imposing Islam on them, and so on. So this is very Islamic, and it was not a big surprise to me, honestly, because that's how I grew up as well. I mean, I grew up believing that the Christians and the Jews are enemies, that non-Muslims are enemies, that they are vile, that they are pigs and rats, and that we are not to trust them, that we are better, and the day will come when we will fight again with them, and we will subjugate them, and they will all become Muslims or become our slaves, and so on. This is Islam.
Hi there, I hope you're enjoying the show. If you'd like a free chapter from my book, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, and also from my latest book, Why I'm Still a Christian, then subscribe to my newsletter and I'll send you those chapters along with updates on my work. I won't spam you, just encourage you with Thinking Faith articles, events, videos and resources. The newsletter link is with the info. Enjoy the rest of the show. So at what point did those doubts, which turned into, I suppose, full-on skepticism about the Quran and Islam, at what point, I suppose, did you have to say to yourself, I no longer believe in this?
It was, I guess I didn't last very long in Islam, but it was like for 2 years or so, I was very strict in trying to follow it. In my third year of that, I started getting really shaky and kind of it became very difficult to follow things with all the doubts in my mind, and I started neglecting my prayers. And I guess 3.5 years or so after that, with all the questions going through my head, at some point, I remember the moment still where I was going home, and I was just thinking and arguing in my head the entire way long, and it was a very, very long way. And eventually I arrived at the door, and I thought to myself, I don't believe in it. I don't think that this is the true religion. I don't believe in Allah. I don't think that He is actually the one who revealed all this. I think this is man-made. So I told myself quietly but explicitly, I am no longer a Muslim. I am not a Muslim. I don't believe in Islam. I don't believe in Allah. And so it took several years of practicing it very strictly, and they were very intense years, and several years of questioning and trying to wrestle with it. After 20 years of being raised in it, that I eventually left. And then a phase of rebellion started against it, and anger. And also despair, honestly. It wasn't easy. It's not easy when you are indoctrinated with such a strong and such a brutal and such a terrifying religion, which also in its scripture, by the way, describes how Allah will, like in Christianity, I find it kind of funny how there are speculations and discussions about the afterlife and all that. In Islam, there is no room for any speculation, because the Quran makes it very clear. It says that those who have any doubts, that those who disbelieve, that those who question, they will be brutally punished in the afterlife. Their skin will be burned. They will be skinned alive, and then they will feel all the pain. And when they are just almost done, Allah will restore their skin so they can feel the skin. They can feel the pain all over again, and they will go through immense, amounts of torture by Allah because of what they have done, because of their rejection of the truth, and so on. So it's very, very explicit. There is no room to somehow interpret this differently, and you are told basically this all your life, that if you question, there's also a hadith, a hadith is a quote or an instance of Muhammad saying something, where he says, the devil comes to some of you and asks you who created this and who created that, until he comes to you and says, who created Allah? When he comes to you with such idle thoughts, abstain from them and ask Allah for repentance. So his response to somebody asking some questions is not to explain things or to give an allegory, to give a good moment of explanation that people can use for eternity. It is just be quiet and stop thinking. And the Quran also says, that the true believers, when they hear a word spoken by Muhammad and by Allah, simply say, I hear and I obey. They do not question. So this is Islam. You are told not to question, you are told to be obedient, you are told to be sheepish, quiet, and if not, then you will be killed and you will be brutally tortured in the afterlife.
So what was the path towards, as it were, going public with this? I can imagine a lot of people in your position might choose to say, well, I just won't practice anymore, or I won't be very devout Muslim, but obviously there can be repercussions. What were the repercussions for you? And what made you want to do something as drastic as starting a YouTube channel talking about Islam and your rejection of it, the problems you have with it, and so on?
I guess I always had a little bit of a rebellious nature, and kind of a sense of a desire for justice, especially when I thought that something really messed with me or lied to me, and I got really angry about it. It's kind of funny, with my recent adoption of Christian faith and morality, I see some of that change in very good ways, because it wasn't always very comfortable. It was very wild. But with that whole perspective of being fooled and being used by this religion, being terrified by it, I did feel some resentment toward it. But one of the worst things was also that I kept following the narratives in the West, and I kept seeing this whole trend of certain Muslim scholars and Muslim people trying to make it look like Islam is totally misunderstood. It's totally a religion of peace and tolerance, and all the bad things that are done in the name of it are completely unrelated to Islam. And I knew this entire time that's nonsense. That's nonsense. You all know that is nonsense. We all know what Muslims learn. We know what the Quran says. We know what the traditions say. We know what Muslims did over over 1,400 years. We know what we learn when we are children. We learn to glorify the brutal offensive fights that the Muslims waged in order to spread their religion, in order to justify their religion. We learn to hail the Islamic warriors as wonderful, great heroes because they fought and killed and took captives and so on. So you all know that this whole narrative of Islam is misunderstood, it's a religion of peace, just like any other religion, is complete nonsense. And unfortunately, after 9/11, it was George W. Bush who also, I guess, to deal with unrest after 9/11, amplified this idiotic message when he went out and said, this has nothing to do with Islam. Islam is a religion of peace. So, and those who want to deceive the masses really used that and started repeating that phrase again and again and again. And I wanted to really just speak out about that and tell people. In my head, I would, whenever there is an instance of somebody saying Islam is a religion of peace, I would appear there and say, "Be quiet. that's wrong. So I thought, well,
how did your parents react though to this? How did your family react?
I actually didn't tell them for the longest time because I guess I kind of was, despite the bad stuff, I always had lots of respect for my parents and also lots of love for my mother. And it felt very difficult for me to tell them or to let them know that I'm going down this path. So I just saved it until I was ready to tell them or until they found out. And it was only 2 years after I started my whole activism that they actually became aware of what I'm doing. And it wasn't very nice, you know. So my father hasn't spoken to me since he found out. He also very explicitly disowned me. He very explicitly sent me a message and said that that under these circumstances we can't consider you our son, and I only advise you to change your ways and to return from this huge mistake. Otherwise, you are not our son, he said. And that's the last message that I ever received from him. I never responded to it. I kind of thought, if that's what you think, then I'm not going to change. I'm not going to change what I'm doing, what I think is right. So my relationship with my mother is very strained since then, but I'm still in touch with her. We still occasionally talk. Things are, of course, very different when we talk nowadays. We always had a very very sweet relationship, but since they found out, it's like it's quite not like that anymore. And it has been difficult, but I learned to cope with it. With many others, relatives, especially religious ones, cut ties with me completely. I tried at some point to contact some, they never responded. People that I grew up with, that I interacted with for many, many years, cut ties with me completely and informed each other about what I do. One person that I knew of, that I knew who was like a loosely friendly to me, actually, when he found out the things that I say about his faith and his government in Turkey, said that if he sees me, he will behead me and throw my head onto the square in Istanbul. So that wasn't very nice.
Well, I mean, you laugh, but I mean, were death threats, especially as you became more public on YouTube and elsewhere, were they common from Muslims?
Yeah, extremely common. So they were very common. The funny thing is that I feel like they were more common in the past. They were more common when I started out. They were more common within the first 2 years or so. I feel like they became less frequent over the last years. Although just last year I received a very messed up threat directly spoken by a person that I was debating, who did this to me during the debate and said, when I see you, your face will be everywhere and all that. We had to then kind of alert the FBI on him, so now he's under investigation. Very funny. But I received death threats and things like that over the years. And in the first few years, it was occasionally difficult to deal with, and also gave me anxiety. And I started taking medication against it and going to therapy and all that, and also talking to the FBI. And they would come to visit me and to check on me and to just get the latest updates on what kind of people are threatening me and so on. But to also assure me that what's very funny is that they said this thing to me, which is like both comforting and also really, really disturbing at the same time, which is that all these death threats that you see from people who are sending you death threats, they shouldn't worry you, because those who actually do it, they won't tell you about it before they come. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah,
oh,
yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Okay, great. Oh, hang on. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so...
But I learned to... I really got used to it, and I started just joking about it after a while. So nowadays, I'm not worried about it at all. Yeah.
As you entered this period, then quite a lengthy period, where you were starting to create videos critiquing Islam, warning people away from embracing Islam. Where were you when it came to the God question? Had all of this made you think, well, religion in general must be false, there is no God? Did you call yourself an atheist, an agnostic, or something else?
It was a long process, but so when I first turned away from Islam, my conclusion was that so when I first turned away from Islam and when I first admitted to myself that I'm no longer a Muslim, the question of God wasn't entirely resolved, and I thought to myself, I don't know if there is a God or not. I just don't know. What I know is that what I know for certain is that it is not Islam. It's just not possible. It can't be. This is ridiculous, and that became more and more firm. And I think I actually intensified my studies on Islam after I left Islam even more, and started dealing with all of it very, very thoroughly, dealing with objections very thoroughly, and so came to the conclusion by which I stand now more than ever, that Islam is absolutely false and absolutely man-made and ridiculous and actually a great evil in the world. When it came to the question of God, it was still open, but after a year or so after I left Islam, I thought to myself, there is just not enough reason to believe that there is a God, and the most reasonable explanation is that there is no God. And I also kind of went with the trend of New Atheism at the time. I can't really credit any of the New Atheists people for causing this, but I did listen to some of the stuff that Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens and all those people said, and I kind of ran with the whole idea of the best explanation is that there is no God. And at the peak of my atheism, I guess my thoughts were that that the idea of God is just one that is proposed because we are trying to find explanations for the natural world, but it is just a suggestion. Nobody can confirm it, so therefore it is most likely not true, and if it can't be established, it can be easily dismissed. That's what it was, but I never really had a very well established reason to completely and firmly reject the existence of God. But I also found debates about whether God exists or not, quite unhelpful. I mean, I listened to them. I listened to the arguments for God's existence, listened to the arguments against God's existence, and I understand that some people might find them helpful and useful. To me, they were always kind of they didn't really do anything, and to this day, I still think that that they are not the way that I would find my way to come to either conclusion. I don't think that they are helpful to me personally, and there are people out there like me who are not very who are not impressed, or who are not, whose minds are not changed by these arguments. But over the last years, I did eventually find myself going towards an agnostic idea that actually I don't know, and I can't say for sure if there is a creator or not. One thing that always was on my mind, that always did bother me, despite my rejection of these arguments for and against God's existence, is the idea of intelligent design, and the idea that there is a force or something behind all of this. Because even if I accept that all of this just pops into existence, or pops from a small position to something bigger, and it keeps expanding, and so on and so on. It's just it's just always intriguing and kind of disturbing that all of this would just be happening and continuing for no reason at all. That millennia, millions of years would pass by, billions of years would pass by for no reason at all. That we would just live on this planet for a very short time. And I made peace with the idea of moral of existentialism and absurdism, such as that there is seemingly no purpose, no inherent purpose to life, no inherent purpose to anything, but it's okay, because trying to struggle with that, trying to deal with that, just leads to more difficulty and all that, and it's good to embrace the difficulty and absurdity of this nothingness and to make the best of it and all that. So I was kind of coping with all of this, but
Yeah. Just before we come to the next stage in your journey, at a personal level, I think you had obviously met and married your wife by this point. What was kind of her journey? Again, we won't hear the full story of this, but had had she had any similar kind of religious inclinations or lost them, or what was going on for her?
Yeah, she was actually. So she grew up in an evangelical Orthodox family, which is a Protestant Orthodox group that embraced Orthodoxy but never became fully Orthodox, and doesn't belong to any Orthodox church out there. But she grew up in that, and then explored different denominations, and was kind of like Protestant throughout most of her life, and then at some point left the religion and became an atheist herself. So when I met her, I actually met her online. She was an atheist, and I was an atheist, and we had fun, talking about this and joking about this, and joking about Islam and all of that. So our relationship was very much established upon our lack of faith and how much we understand and enjoy talking to each other and all that. So we came together and eventually established a family. And I have 2 kids now with her. And but the funny thing about all of this is that even with my atheism, I always early on had this whole idea that I kind of have respect for religion, except Islam, and that I have respect for religious expressions, that I have respect for the idea of God and respect for religious values and so on. So we kind of always had this hybrid in our family of skepticism and atheism, but also some amount of Christian values, I could say. And I always had lots of respect for them. I always had lots of respect for liturgical music and all that. So, but the funny thing is, in my mind, and in the minds of lots of people, it would be me who would first become a Christian, who would first come to the faith. But I was actually exploring like Judaism and different kinds of believing. And she is the one who, despite her more hostile attitude toward religion and Christianity specifically in the past, became a Christian first and started going to an Orthodox church. And I saw how things really changed for her, how it transformed her, how she became so much happier and more peaceful and more understanding, and just had this serenity about her that I was very impressed by. She wasn't any more easily annoyed or easily depressed by things. She was suddenly at peace with the world, and would also tell me about it, and I could feel it and I could sense it. And anyway, you want me to go on there, or?
Well, yeah. It's so interesting to hear that it was obviously your wife initially who had perhaps started to make that impression on you. Well, turns out that some forms of faith can provide some kind of peace and wholeness and healing. So, yeah, tell me about your journey. Where did you go from this point onwards? Had you started to engage with other Christians at any level? And what ultimately made you start to think about taking Christianity seriously?
Yeah, it was. So as said, I always had respect for it. I also had a long friendship with David Wood, who I would say has been a great influence in many ways. I have always been impressed with the way he is, and I don't tell this to him because I don't want him to feel special or arrogant or anything. But it was always remarkable to me that like he was diagnosed with an antisocial personality disorder, and I can clearly see that when people feel like sad and suffering and all that, like he clearly can't relate. He clearly can't relate to most of our pathetic feelings and all that. But despite all of this, his Christian faith turned him into a very, very, very good person, and there are only very few people out there that I would trust with my life, and he's one of them. And I see how selfless and how good and how awesome he is about things. And it is incredible how it transforms people. I also saw over these years how much I interacted with other Christians online and offline, and always saw the goodness in them. So there was always something impressive. I was also personally impressed with, or kind of interested in, Christian symbols and Christian wordings and Christian beliefs and biblical stuff. I read, as an atheist, the book of Ecclesiastes several times, and every single time I was blown away by it. I was impressed with it. I thought it's a book that is so ahead of its time, and I still do, and I think it's incredible. But it was, so the big change in my heart started when, in 2023, when on October 7, the Hamas terrorist organization committed a terrorist attack in Israel, killed over 1,000 people. And I always had lots of respect and love for Jews and for Israel. And after that, I started focusing on that very greatly. And we took a trip, David and I, to Israel. And while there, there were certain moments that are unforgettable to me on my journey, such as when we visited the Western Wall. It felt very overwhelming, and I thought, it's almost like there is a presence there of something that is far beyond my understanding. And I still feel it when I think about it. And then when we visited the Western Wall, the first time, on the same day, as we walked away from it, I saw two old Jewish men who approached us. They were ultra-Orthodox, and they were there to basically preach to other Jews on observing the commandments of God and, being obedient and following God. So they approached us and like, hi, where are you from? And as they learned that we are not Jewish, they were like, oh, okay. So, but they asked, so where are you from? What are you doing here? And I explained to him that we are, from America, and that we are here to kind of report about the things that happened since October 7 and all that. And I also then expressed and said, I feel I'm here to show your side of things and to support and all that. And one of the men, old, religious, he started tearing up and getting very emotional and saying, God bless you, thank you, you are a very good man. And the other one then turns around and says, wait, let me give you something. And he goes away, grabs a leaflet and puts it down again, comes toward me, clearly confused about what he's doing. And they were so emotionally moved. And they talked to me about how this is very special and how God blesses us. And he said, one of those men, he I don't know, pointed at me, at my face, and he said something like, you don't know him, but he knows you, and all that, or something like that. And it was for some reason, I can't remember anything specifically that they said, but it's just, the whole thing was very overwhelming to me. And then also on our way back from Israel, I said to David on the flight, very sincerely, I have been to many countries. I have interacted with people from many countries, but coming here and seeing these people, I have the feeling that these people are incredibly special, and I don't understand. I absolutely don't understand, and can't possibly reasonably and rationally explain how such wonderful people, the people that I have been most impressed with for their goodness and for their basic joyfulness, are universally attacked and hated and maligned on such a level. And I looked at David and I said, I almost feel like there's something greater at play here. I don't know. And he looked at me and was like, you think? No. And so from there I was moved, and I was actually impressed with Judaism. And I started exploring Judaism for a year after that time. And I started thinking that I might want to just become Jewish, and adopting Jewish practices and going into them, and started getting a Jewish prayer book and doing Jewish prayers and all that. And I at that point, my wife turned toward Christianity, and I had a rejection of Christianity and thought, no, I'm going to focus on this. I'm going to focus on Judaism and focus on the Old Testament, on the Tanakh, and learn from it and so on. But the thing is, so as I still have lots of respect and love for Jews and Judaism, but as I tried it, as I explored it, I feel like I did something noble, something nice, but I never really felt like I was actually doing something meaningful. Until it was very interesting. My wife one day asked me, because I was struggling with things. She asked me to read just one chapter in Romans, and I said, yeah, sure, I will do that. So I picked it up. I opened the Bible. I started reading Romans from the beginning. I only read the part that she asked me to read. As I was reading it, I don't remember which part it was. I think it was something about Paul mentioned something about I can do nothing of my own. But yeah, so as I read that, I was very impressed by it. So I went to the beginning of the book and started reading the whole thing. And then I came across chapter 9 through 11, where it talks about God's relationship with the Jews and Israel. And it was something that I really cared about a lot at that time. And I was very, very impressed with the things that it said. And I kept reading. And although she asked me to only read one chapter, I just read through all of Romans. And I thought, this is awesome. This is beautiful. This is incredible. I learned so much just sitting and reading through this. So that kind of she asked me to go to church with her before, and I rejected it. But it was until she gave me that I guess this opened a door. I also had rosary beads with me at home because I was interested in them in the past, and I started looking into how it actually goes to pray the rosary. It was around that time that I started just out of interest doing it, and it felt beautiful. It was beautiful, and I started exploring the meaning of it, and reading more passages from the New Testament. And at some point, my wife asked me again, very nicely and very kindly, "Would you like to go to church with me today?" And I said, "Yeah." So I got ready and went to church with her. And
what was your experience? First time going to church in that kind of way? The surprising rebirth of belief in God has been making waves since its launch. Many have predicted the death of God, not least the new atheists who proclaimed that science and reason would eradicate religion. And if you look at the statistics on church-going and belief in the modern West, you might be tempted to believe them. But there's an alternative story to be told about the surprising rebirth of belief in God. What if the tide of faith is beginning to come in again? I'm Justin Brierley, and I've been hosting conversations on faith between skeptics, seekers and believers all my adult life. Now, on the award-winning The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, discover the story of why new atheism grew old and secular thinkers are considering Christianity again. Featuring interviews with leading thinkers across the faith spectrum, you'll learn the inside account of the rise and fall of new atheism. Why secular intellectuals like Jordan Peterson, Louise Perry and Tom Holland are talking about faith again. How developments in science, history, psychology and consciousness are pointing many back towards a divine mind. And why our modern day meaning crisis is priming a generation to investigate whether the biblical vision of life in all its fullness could be true after all. Plus, you'll see and hear live events debating the surprising rebirth and hear from many adult converts who, after searching for a story to live by, were surprised to find the Christian story made sense of their lives. All 30 episodes of Season 1 of The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God are available now. Listeners like Mark say this has to be the most thought-provoking podcast on the internet. Find out why we've become a #1 ranked religion and spirituality podcast when you jump in at episode 1. Go to justinbrierley.com/surprisingrebirth to subscribe on your favourite podcast platform. That's justinbrierley.com.
It was very strange because I was overwhelmed, not in an emotional way, but rather in, I was kind of confused and I didn't know what to do with all of it. It was all so different and all so new. But it was also, as I looked around, I recognized things that I had learned from my explorations of Judaism and Jewish traditions, especially early Judaism and Second Temple Judaism, that I see done in an Orthodox church. It was very interesting, and the hymns that are sung and all that were stuck in my head. But the first time that I went there, I was like, there was something very nice, but I also didn't know what to do about it. the following week, and I didn't go. I was trying to collect my thoughts. The weekend after that, I asked my wife myself. I said, "Hey, I want to go to church with you today," and that's the time that I, for the first time, actually deliberately, willingly went, just in order to participate. I consider that day the first time that I actually went to church for the first time. So then that day I went, and as I was there, I tried to follow the service as much as I can, and it was so beautiful, you know. I loved it, and the priest came and interacted with me and spoke to me. The others were very welcoming. I could make so many connections with the scripture, the readings, with certain processions in the Orthodox Church and how they relate to Jewish tradition, early Jewish tradition, and so on. And I was like, oh yeah, I know this. I know what this is about. I know this. I recognize this. I recognize what this is meant to be in the church, and so on. But mostly the prayers and the things said and the repeated in the Orthodox Church, the repeated "Lord have mercy" prayers felt very special. And I guess something about humility and repentance in religion always felt kind of very nice to me. And then there was one part which is there's one part which is in preparation for the communion, the prayer that is done in preparation for the communion, where at the beginning of it and at the end of it twice, it is said, "And I will not give you a kiss as did Judas, but I will ask you remember me in your like the thief, remember me in your kingdom." And when that was said, I was like, I know the story, and it felt very touching. But it opened the doors. At that time, I was already very, very much inclined to believing in God, believing in something greater. But I was impressed with Christianity. After I went that one time to church, I wanted to go again and again and again. The third time, I actually asked the priest if I can join the church, if I can become a catechumen. And he was very surprised. And I said to him, look, the thing is, I love it, I respect it, I really like it. The thing is that I have so many years of hardcore skepticism and atheism, and I don't really know what to do with the whole question of God and whether it is true or not. I don't know what to do with it, and I feel like, what if I never believe in it? What if I can never, what if I go into it and I feel like, no, I'm not, I don't think it's true and all that, and I find myself out. And the priest is a Greek Turkish priest, and he knows that I'm of Turkish origin. So he said something very, very nice and very funny, which is, he said to me, look, when you become a catechumen in the church, he said, right now, when you just come to the church and attend the service, it's like getting a little whiff, a little smell of a good kebab, he said. And when you become a catechumen, you're basically getting in line to get one of those kebabs. While you're in line, you can still decide if you actually want to take one or not. So I thought, that's very funny, but it also makes a lot of sense. So and at the same time, I had a conversation there with an Orthodox monk, to whom I talked about my obsession with knowledge and skepticism and confirmation and truth, and the guy just turned my world upside down, and just in one little speech that he gave me, which was about the arrogant need to always know for certain that something is true, or to be the most knowledgeable person in the room, to be to give people the impression that you're very, very intelligent and very knowledgeable, because that's basically how I felt the entire time. And what I also was kind of trying to tell him, and he told me about how much better it is to, with humility, instead of talking and giving people the impression that you know everything, to just sit and listen, and to accept that you don't know everything, to accept that there might be more to everything that you might know, and all that. It was a very profound speech that he gave to me, which very, very surprisingly and impressingly turned 10 years of skepticism completely upside down. It made me think, I don't have to be 100% sure of anything. I don't have to say, oh, I have to know everything. I can just be humble and just listen and be quiet for once in my life. So,
and I guess in a way that is part of what faith is. We can't know everything, but we know enough to take that step and to commit ourselves. So that's what you've chosen to do. I understand you are in the process of becoming confirmed in the Orthodox Church. What is the timeline for that, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, at the beginning, I was less sure about faith, about God, about Jesus, and about the Bible and all that. At this point, I have come to, I've also picked up a daily prayer rule, which I do every day, and also affirm certain things of, certain the Nicene Creed and things like that. I have now come to accept that it's not even a question to me anymore, and it kind of feels weird to say whether there is a God. I have come to believe in God. I have come to believe in Christ. And it started not with acknowledging first that it is true. It started first with acknowledging how beautiful and how impressive and how remarkable and how awesome it is. And I actually, to be very honest, at the beginnings, told myself, it is clearly better to be this way. And with all I know from all those years, it is clearly, I'm very impressed with Christianity, and I'm very impressed with Christ, and I'm very impressed with who Christ is and what Christianity teaches and the things that he preached. I don't even care if it's actually fully true or not. That's how I started out, until after a while I came to believe and affirm it, and I believe in it, and I affirm it, and I love it, and I have faith in it, and I pray. But and I told my priest about this process as well. And so normally in the Orthodox Church, it's like nowadays, catechism learning until fully being baptized in the church takes about a year, or sometimes less, sometimes more. He wanted to kind of fast track me, but then he was kind of at odds with the bishop, who said, we have a rule actually nowadays that it's like everyone should be like learning for at least 1 year and then be baptized into it. So we'll have to stick to that, but I'm okay with it. I'm fine with it. I'm in the process. I guess by the beginning of next year, I hope to be fully a part of the church and to take communion and all that. This is the process.
It is the process. It's a very ancient process. This process of catechesis, it goes right back, as I'm sure you know, to the early church. Was really, there's a kind of, I'm not saying it's wrong, but in most modern Protestant churches, you make a declaration of faith and be baptized the same day. Whereas, there was this real sense that this was so important in those early years that very often this tradition of catechesis over a long period before baptism was introduced. It's so interesting and encouraging to hear your story. If you've got time for us to continue talking a little bit more about Islam generally, it'd be great to do that, Ridvan. Just before we turn to that, you've described, obviously, the kind of very sad way in which relationships have been strained. You've received death threats after you've stopped being Islamic and, I guess, embraced atheism, agnosticism. Has there been any response from the atheist community, which you were quite involved in, since your announcement that you've decided to become a Christian? Have they? I'm sure you haven't received death threats, but have they reacted with any measure of skepticism, or are they just very accepting of it? You do whatever you need to do. Ridvan, what's been the response?
Well, I was kind of I was wondering how it would go, because there was a lot of people who knew me from my online activities generally kind of viewed me as a one of those atheists who is firmly an atheist, but who has very respectful interactions with religious people, with Christian people foremost, and all that. And but there were lots of people who were just hoping that I would continue with the whole atheist path. So I was wondering how things would turn out. But I'm actually kind of pleasantly surprised that lots of the reactions from atheist people, especially those that I have been interacting with for quite a long time now, have been quite positive. Many of the former Muslim atheists that I know have usually said the very same thing, which is, "Oh wow, I respect your decisions. I respect your newfound faith. I'm happy for you. I'm glad it makes you happy. I'm glad if it makes you a better person," and all that. So this has been the general response by lots of people that I interacted with, by most recently Armin Navabi, who is a very well-known ex-Muslim atheist, and many different others, Abdullah Samir and some others, but also from the Western atheist sphere, from those in the Christian culture, the response has generally been okay. It has generally been good and been like, oh, okay, if this is what you do, then yeah, I respect it. It's good. It's cool. Although there are some people, especially in this sphere, that weren't very, 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 very good about it. And I don't want to drop any names, although I'm just going to drop one here, which is Matt Dillahunty. So,
I did see some responses between you on X or somewhere where he was, I don't know, I guess maybe insinuating that, well, you were never a thought through atheist to begin with or something like that.
It's so funny because for years I got this response from Muslims of, "Oh, you were never a real Muslim to begin with," or if you were a real Muslim, you would have never left Islam. The real Muslims don't leave Islam, and so on. And I know Matt Dillahunty. We worked together briefly, occasionally in the past, and we had interactions in the past, and occasionally commented on each other's stuff. And when I turned to religion, he had a very, very averse reaction to this, and said things like, "But can you prove that it is true?" And it's like, I'm not here to prove that anything is true or false. One day I just posted a photo of my church and just said, "Life is better this way." And his response to that was literally, "Prove that it is true. Prove it." It's like, what do you want me to prove? Like that I'm happy, that life is better this way? I guess I could do that. And then his response was also that that for years I I lied to him and to others and tricked them by pretending to be a skeptic, although a skeptic would never end up then believing in Christianity, which is like, you should know that this is very fallacious and very nonsensical, and also some really pathetic behavior. So, and I told him that as well, and still, like, no hard feelings. No hard feelings. I wish to one day have a conversation with him properly, although I think it's very difficult to have a proper conversation with him, honestly. But so some people like him haven't given a very good reaction, but generally it has been nice.
Well, that's good to hear. Do take a sip. Let's talk a little bit, if you've time, Ridvan. I appreciate the time you've already given me, over an hour now. But I would love to talk just in the last maybe 15 minutes that we've got about Islam generally. Islam is a growing religion globally, and in some respects, it's in parts of the West, in Europe, it's because of immigration, because of the growth rates through birth rates. It's seen as potentially something that will replace Christianity or even secularism or atheism. I mean, what do you make of that? Do you see Islam gaining ground in that sort of way? And what do you think of it?
There are different sides to all of this, but Islam is definitely growing according to research that was conducted a long time ago, that was conducted more recently, although the growth is likely slowing down. But there is an issue. So early on, when the whole information that Islam is a rapidly growing religion came out, lots of people jumped on it and started propagating the idea that the world is converting to Islam, that people are converting to Islam in masses. This was never true. There was never a big trend of people converting to Islam in very large numbers. Even early on, Pew Research, for example, which made one of the first big announcements that Islam is the fastest growing religion of all, made it very explicit when they described why Islam is growing. And they pointed out that I think 99.7%, the growth of Islam is attributed to high birth rates and to young age, whereas only 0.3% of it is due to conversion. So, it's not a religion that is very, very, rapidly winning over people and converting them. It is a religion that is growing through birth rates, through migration, through age, and so on. According to different studies, Muslims generally, even if they are in the same environment, so even Muslims within the same country, even within the same neighborhood, generally have a significantly higher birth rate compared to other religious groups down the road, down the street, for example, Christians or Hindus or others. So they have much higher birth rates, which also has to do with the way Islam treats things, the way Islam tells people, the way Muhammad says, for example, according to the tradition, that on the day of judgment he will boast about the numbers of Muslims. It is commanded for them to make babies, to make as many children as possible. It is also commanded to treat women basically as not equal beings, but rather as lesser beings that basically serve just to be at home and to make babies and to take care of that kind of stuff. And if they disobey, if they're arrogant, then you should beat them and so on. So the role of women is obviously that of just baby making machines, which contributes to this whole thing very largely. And then there is the issue of mass migration, of often unchecked mass migration into Western nations of Muslim populations, which also leads to the impression that Islam is very rapidly growing because suddenly you see more Muslims around you than before. I don't think, and it's very, very widely contested, that there is actually a trend of conversion to Islam. According to the research that we have in America, for example, the number of people who convert to Islam is offset by the number of people who leave Islam. So most people who convert to Islam leave Islam within a few years. This is one of the researches. And then we have Islam in Muslim nations. We have very prominently right now, Iran, for example, is a nation that turned from a Muslim majority nation to a Muslim minority nation in decades. Around the time of the Iranian Islamic Revolution, it was a mostly Muslim country. Nowadays, according to the polls, only a minority believes in Islam, only a minority identifies as Muslim, and so on. While Christianity, for example, is growing in that place.
Yeah. I think it said that it may be the fastest growing church in the world, the church in Iran, interestingly. So there's a very interesting story there. But coming back to Islam as it's being expressed in the West. So I, as you may be aware, have written a book and now this podcast series on the surprising rebirth of belief in God. And I believe we're seeing this change, more or less, back to a renewed interest in faith and in God after the years of secularism that the new atheism, have not made good on their promises and people are looking for a better story. So I've been charting the way that's happening, certainly in Christian circles. And I think you're a very interesting example of this. Someone who was a Muslim, became an atheist, and then eventually came back to church and to Christianity because you were looking for this beauty and this purpose and this meaning and this transcendence. But there's been a number of people, and I think it's probably true, who have said to me, well, is there also a surprising rebirth in Islam? Is it not possible that young men, especially who are, coming back to faith, that just as young men are coming back to faith, there are also young men in Islam coming back to faith who are becoming much more devout, who perhaps been largely secular, but now returning to a much stronger form of Islam, and obviously some conversion along the way as well. So I suppose what I want to ask is, do you think there is sort of, for want of a better word, an increasing strength in Islam because people are looking for something better than the secular liberal story, and that may be attracting both converts and people within Islam to become more radical and devout in their Islamic faith?
I think it does. I think it is connected slightly to certain trends in personalities, certain trends in society. I think certainly if you so I wouldn't say that Islam is in the same way that Christianity is recently picking up again, becoming popular. With Christianity, we have according to Pew Research, the decline of Christianity seems to have come to a halt. That's what they said. There is a revival of the narrative, a change in the narrative on Christianity. I think, wasn't it Alex O'Connor recently also pointed that out. There's a change in how people express their thoughts on Christianity. There's a lot of return, a lot of respect for Christianity over the last years, which is very, very nice, very good to see. But of course, there's also a part of the population, often people that are kind of that are a little bit destructive, that are a little bit sick, that are not, that are not very that don't like to go into the good direction, but rather in the more destructive directions, who would also find themselves in Islam, for example. I'm sorry for putting it that way, but it's just, I guess it's very obvious. You have certain prominent figures who recently converted to Islam and also publicly stated it, such as Andrew Tate, or Sneeko is one of the other ones. Both of these people are people who don't necessarily stick out for doing good things. Especially Andrew Tate is a criminal. He's now under investigation and charged and on trial for multiple charges of sexual assault, human trafficking, corruption, violence, blackmail, and so on, in multiple different countries, not just in Romania, but in multiple different countries. He was one of the recent, excuse me, people who contributed to the recognition of Islam as an alternative to people. So there is this thing that people, because of certain trends and because it's also something new and exotic to the Western people, become interested in Islam. But then it seems to truly attract not the best people, and also quickly proves to not be a fulfilling way of living. It is not a fulfilling way of living. It's not a fulfilling way of to think about things. What Christianity gives people, if we were just talking about the human aspect, just the emotional aspect, what Christianity gives people is peace, serenity. I learned to love, to forgive people. I learned to pray for those that I fought with for so long. What Islam gives people is even more anger, even more stress, even more hate, even more division, even more hopelessness and sickness and wickedness, and the rejection and the humiliation of women, the aiming for an afterlife that is all about having endless pleasure and deflowering virgins forever, and so on. So one of these things is a very fulfilling religion. The other is a very messed up, morally questionable and evil one. So from my observations, I see a rebirth in Christianity. I don't really see one in Islam. I see, on the contrary, a rapid decline in Islamic faith in Muslim countries, and I also often see a decline of how Islam is expressed in Western countries. I mean, just look at America. It might be an extreme example, but the Muslims in America, according to all research, are very, very different from Muslims in Muslim countries, and have become a very largely secular religious group. There might be exceptions where there are like communities of Somalis, for example, who build Muslim communities in certain neighborhoods and all that. But on average, Muslims in America are very un-Islamic. It's because life is just better without Islam.
I was going to say as well, one of the things that has been on the news here in the UK at the time of recording is the renewed inquiry into the rape gangs scandal and those that were happening in a number of northern cities and towns here in the UK. And the fact that the government and the authorities were so unwilling to talk about the ethnicity and religion of the people who were perpetrating these crimes, primarily, almost exclusively, Pakistani Muslim men. So what's your thoughts about that? And I suppose the more theological question I want to ask is this in any way prescribed by the Quran or Islam? You know, most Muslims I've heard from in any way say this is absolutely abhorrent and this is not Islam. This is just some people doing terrible things. What's your view on this?
So I saw the recent announcements on the. I still haven't gotten to read the whole report on the UK audit on grooming gangs, the renewed one. But one quote that I pulled up and also posted is that there's a clear evidence of overrepresentation among suspects of Asian and Pakistani heritage men. Examples of organizations avoiding the topic altogether for fear of appearing racist or raising community tensions, and there are lots of mentions of authorities avoiding trying to put down the background and ethnicity and religion of the people because of fears of raising Islamophobia and things like that. But there is a clear renewed acknowledgement, which we need to talk about, which is that there is a very, very, very high percentage, a disproportionate amount of people of Muslim cultures among grooming and rape gang perpetrators, while the victims are generally non-Muslim and white. So there is, of course, the question whether this is Islamically allowed or not. I would say I will be very fair and honest about this. Strictly religiously, scripturally, morally seen, it would not be permissible normally for a regular Muslim to engage in going and taking a girl without marital relations and having intercourse with her or using her for business or for abuse or whatever it is. There is, however, a different component to this, which is what contributes to mostly people of Muslim origin engaging in this kind of stuff, which is that the very trend that I mentioned from the beginning of our conversation, which is that Muslims are repeatedly taught and told this whole idea that it is us against the non-Muslims. There is a saying in the Muslim culture, in Muslim tradition, which is that that Muslims are one nation and non-Muslims are one. No, Muslims are one nation and the disbelievers are one nation. It is us against them. We're not supposed to befriend them. We're supposed to convert them or subjugate them and be superior over them. This is the Islamic way. And then there is another element, which is that Muhammad himself started a major slave trade and allowed his men to treat the women of the opponents, of the non-Muslims, as properties, to defeat their husbands and their caretakers and to take them, no matter at what age they are, the girls and the women, to take them as slaves and to have sex with them at will, whenever you want. So basically to rape them, to abuse them. This was very common for 1,400 years in Islamic culture, and Muhammad himself allowed this. He also did it according to the traditions. He himself had took captives of war as slaves and turned them into sex slaves, and he also explicitly allowed it to his companions, to his followers. And then there is the other aspect, which is the question of the hijab, women covering themselves up. So according to the Islamic belief, this is considered totally authentic. The wives of Muhammad were going outside to go to the place where they do their bathroom stuff, which was on an open place back then. And the men, including the close advisors of Muhammad, would observe them and would look at them. And they increasingly got disturbed that it's actually the wives of Muhammad going there and people just look at them. So they said to Muhammad, so one of the men, Omar, said to Muhammad, "Command your wives to be veiled." He repeatedly said this until, of course, Allah wonderfully sent down a revelation where he then commands them commands women to be veiled. And so they should be veiled so that they are not harassed and abused. Islamic tradition from the very beginning, according to also famous, very well-known Islamic scholars like Ibn Kathir, is that the veiling of Muslim women was instructed by Allah in order to separate them from those women who are not protected and who are believers, who are disbelievers, or who are prostitutes and slaves. So the idea here is very clear. A veiled woman is a faithful and chaste Muslim woman. An unveiled woman, so one who doesn't wear a full cover, is a disbeliever, a slave, or a prostitute. And they just get harassed. That's just how it goes. But you're supposed to not harass the Muslims. With the others, it's just, that's just what happens. So this is the attitude. It is because of this, also because of this culture, it is ingrained and generally considered almost culturally acceptable to harass non-Muslim women and to use them. In Western culture, you will often find that, in Western nations, you will often find that among Muslim populations, there is this whole idea that that although it is haram, it is wrong, you will just live your life and have sex with a bunch of non-Muslim women, and then when the time comes for marriage, you will choose a chaste, pious Muslim woman and marry her and build a family. The same thing is, of course, not allowed for Muslim women. They are supposed to be chaste their entire lives. But you, as a Muslim man, it's just normal. If you live among these people, you will use them, you will have sex with them. They're just a bunch of whores anyway. And then, sorry, but and then when the time comes, you will just build a family with a Muslim woman. So this is the way. This is the view. This is what people learn with this attitude, with this way of thinking. Combine these elements. You see the non-Muslims as enemies. You see them as enemies of Allah. You learn that Allah hates them and that you are to love and hate what Allah loves and hates. There is no loving your enemy and being as kind as possible to them. You have the subjugation of women. You have their use as sex slaves, and then you have the discriminatory view of considering Muslim women as pious women while the others are prostitutes. Combine all of these things together and you get the results that we have with grooming gangs in the UK.
Wow. I mean, understandably, this has caused a lot of controversy here in the UK and elsewhere. And there's a lot of different reactions going on. There are people who are saying we just need to address this problem out in the open, and who are saying it's evidence that there are aspects of Islam and Islamic culture that do not fit with Western democracy and liberal values that we espouse, and so on. There are those who arguably take a more hateful approach. And so there were riots on the streets last summer here in the UK. It was sparked by something different, the very tragic murder of some children at a dance class by someone who turned out in the end to be someone who did have sympathies for Islamic terrorism and extremism. Nonetheless, what that resulted in was a lot of far-right groups being able to sort of stir people up to say, we need to get rid of Muslims, we need to get rid of immigrants. Some people trying to set fire to hotels where refugees and immigrants were staying. So there is this whole question mark about what is the right response, because in a way, this kind of stuff, as awful as it is, can also fuel things that are not the right response either, in terms of far-right groups who kind of come in to wage some kind of war and so on. I guess from where you are now, and speaking as a Christian, where do you think we need to draw those lines? What is a helpful and I suppose ultimately Christ-like response to the reality of Islam in the West and the kinds of things you've just been talking about?
Well, I wouldn't presume to be able to give the proper Christ-like response to things, but I would say that from my understanding of these of people of Islamic culture and the many failings of how to deal with it in Western culture, from my understanding of both cultures, I think there is a terrible mistake that is being made consistently, actually, especially in places like the UK. I would say that I can comfortably say that the UK is probably one of the worst, if not the worst, countries that in terms of how how it treats or how it deals with the rising threat of such a culture and of Islam. I would say that there has to be clear honesty. We shouldn't be afraid. People should not be afraid to say things as they actually are, to say that Islam is incompatible with the values that we have, to say that that there is a very serious and very big problem with Islamic culture being at odds and being in a clash with Western culture and with Christian culture. Christian culture, especially Western Christianity, is what what built and what shaped Western culture very, very largely. Islam is contrary to Christian morality. Islam is contrary to Western culture. It is not reconcilable. It is not reconcilable unless you want to drastically change the values that you have. And the values that you have should be changed for the better. We should return to the values that made these Western cultures great. We shouldn't deviate from them and turn them into something more barbaric and worse. We have to admit that that the Islamic mindset and the Islamic way of thinking and the Islamic way of viewing others is not right, that it's outright wrong. We need to get rid of the ridiculous, stupid idea of moral relativism and of thinking, oh, those guys, they just think differently and we just have to understand each other. No, we don't have to understand each other. I'm sorry. We have to learn about each other and we have to understand why the other side is the way it is, but we also have to correct the other side. We have to stop being so ridiculously stupid and submissive and naive and thinking that we might just be the problem. Yeah, we might just be the problem, but we're clearly not. So it is the other culture at work here that is the problem. The unfortunate bad thing is it's not right. It's not Christ-like from what I can tell, to go out and to engage in riots and in mass violence and to try to collectively punish a population that is associated with these atrocities. But the unfortunate issue is that if you don't take proper measures, that if you don't deal with the problem at hand, that if you are dishonest to your own people, that if you deny your own people the right to speak out and to say things as they are, that if you punish your own people for taking action or for trying to change things, it will lead to resentment, and the resentment will eventually lead to an explosion in anger in the forms of such riots and violence against people as we have seen. In order to prevent, so it is actually the good thing and in the best interest of everyone involved that instead of silencing people, instead of denying the truth, you speak about the problems, you acknowledge the problems, you don't suppress the truth, you acknowledge that there is a big, major Pakistan or Islam problem at hand here, and you deal with it in order to avoid the eventual outburst of frustration and violence that we eventually see, in order to prevent the loss of lives and the loss of and all the damage that would be done. You have to be truthful, and if you have to take certain measures that might not be considered fantastic according to progressive liberal values, such as deporting people who don't fit in, then you have to do it for the betterment of all involved, including the betterment of those who would be deported in this case. So we have to be truthful, we have to be honest, we have to actually go for the solutions, we have to be honest before all and not allow things to become destructive. Because the way things are right now, I'm glad to see the audit and the final admission that there is a big problem which has been suppressed for a long time. Yet still, the way things are going right now, it's not unreasonable to expect that in the future there will be separation on the British Isles, that there will be separatism in England, that there will be Islamists who will try to establish their own dominance and fight with the others. People have given rise to these things. We have now Muslim scholars, we have Muslim teachers recently saying that the Muslim goal should be to to be in charge of at least three Western nations within the next 50 years, including Britain, Australia, and Canada, for example, to have three Muslim prime ministers in place who then will help make Islamic laws. These are things that they are explicitly saying nowadays, which we would be labeled as conspiracy theorists and Islamophobes if we said that these are their goals. You have to prevent this kind of stuff if you don't want a very bad future.
Yeah. Well, it's quite sobering. And perhaps as we finish, we could end on a more encouraging note, which is, what's your experience where you have seen Muslims coming to faith? I mean, you've got your own unique story of how that happens, with obviously a long spell in agnosticism, atheism in between. I mean, are you seeing other stories, though, of people who are coming to faith that, you know, once they're confronted, as you were, with the problems with Islam, that actually they see something different in the Christian story? I know that can be a huge challenge, obviously, because there are so many consequences that people experience to embracing anything other than Islam, if you've been raised in Islam. But yeah, just be interested to know if you sense that there's any change, if you've got any particular instances in mind that you could share with me.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, actually, because for the most time that I was an atheist, I received lots of, especially over the last few years, I received a lot of messages, a lot of contacts, a lot of, genuine emails from people who, even though I'm an atheist, who sent me emails and who sent me just, texts of thanks, of saying, hey, I'm an ex-Muslim. I grew up a Muslim. Thanks to you and David and others, I left Islam, and now I'm a Christian. I believe in Jesus Christ and all that. And I'm an atheist at that point, receiving those emails, and I think this is beautiful. I'm very happy for you. So I received those things for quite a while now, and I feel like they are getting more and more. And now that I have come to faith myself, I see lots of those people returning and saying, "Hey, I'm so glad that you are finally, that you believe too." And now I'm getting so many more who also leave and join the true faith and follow Christ and identify as Christians.
What's the difference, I suppose, in your life, in the lives of those you see, between what they had in Islam and what they have in Christian faith? Because a lot of people from the outside will say, well, they're all worshipping the same God. It doesn't really matter if you're Muslim or Christian. Obviously, you don't say that. But what for you is the big change, if you like, in the way you relate to God, I suppose? And not just the fact that you believe Islam is false, but the way you engage faith and God as a Christian that's different to how it was when you were trying to do that as a Muslim.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that they actually worship the same God. So people who say that kind of stuff, I would say they're mistaken. Muslims don't worship the same God that we worship. They worship a very sick and vile man in the 7th century who pretended to speak to God. They might call him God, but it's not the same God that we worship. But the fundamental differences here would be that that when these people are Muslims, and when I was a Muslim, when people are Muslims, what they generally hold is fear, tribalism, hate, and loyalty to their Islamic community. When they change, they go from this darkness that is generally identified in a very dark way, in a very dark and fearful and hateful way. When they come to Christianity, it turns into hope, into kindness, into forgiveness, into beauty, into actual faith. You're no longer being forced to believe something. You're no longer being held on a leash like a dog trained and treated by a very, very abusive trainer and owner. You're rather finally acknowledged as a human created in the image of God, who can be with God and who can share all the beautiful and good things and partake in the divinity as it is said in the Bible, and live out the image of God, and be with God, be like Christ, be forgiving, loving. You don't have these things in Islam. Islam is darkness. Christianity is light. That's as clear and easy as it is.
Thank you so much, Ridvan, for spending so much time with me today to talk about your journey and to share your thoughts on some of these issues around Islam in the West and the journey that other people are seeing. Really appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you so much, Justin. I really appreciate this. Really love being here, and really glad to have had this conversation. Thank you.